Is anyone in here into deck building card games or even just high strategy board games? I'm talking about Settlers of Catan, I'm talking about DC Comics, Dominion, Clank. I'll even throw Monopoly in there for those of us who are a bit more mainstream. Anyway, the thing about those kinds of games is that they're super fun and they're super strategy based, but also there's a lot of luck involved sometimes, right? Sometimes you just don't get the right card that you need to draw. Sometimes you commit to a strategy, right? You commit to strategy A, but the cards that you draw are only helpful if you're running strategy B. Sometimes it so happens that when other players draw cards that attack someone, the someone they attack is you 90% of the time. What I'm saying is sometimes it certainly feels like you enter a game that, unbeknownst to you, is actually impossible for you to win. It's rigged for you to lose this time. You just don't know it yet. It's frustrating to experience that dynamic in gaming, but it is far more frustrating when it feels like you're rigged to lose when it comes to meaningful friendships or your passions or your future. It doesn't feel fair when you're set up to lose, when you're set up to fail, and when any decision that you make will probably lead you toward a negative outcome. Sure, you'd love to have lots of friends and meaningful connections. You're all for that in theory, but it feels like every time you try to reach out to someone to become friends, you're met with rejection. It feels like you're rigged to lose. Sure, you'd love to aggressively pursue your dream of playing your sport professionally, but unlike the rich kids, you don't have parents who can afford private coaches and camps and programs. It's like you're rigged to lose. Sure, you'd love to get great grades and set a foundation for a stable future, but no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to average better than a B-. It feels like your brain literally cannot master the same things that others can. It feels like you're rigged to lose. Feeling the weight of a split decision isn't much fun even under the best of circumstances, but it's a whole lot worse when it feels like all options are bad options. When no matter what you choose, you're gonna end up failing in the end. Hopefully, what we talk about today is gonna help. If Jesus were the main character of a video game, the Pharisees were the ultra hostile NPCs. As Jesus was going along his main quests and side quests, the NPC Pharisees always seemed to come onto the scene and threaten and nag and distract him. And that's exactly what we find happening in John 8. Only this time, they've dragged someone else into the fray in the hopes they could push Jesus into a split decision with only negative outcomes. And as we read and process how Jesus handles this situation, I think it's going to be helpful as we navigate our own situations where we're faced with decisions that seemingly only have negative outcomes. We're in John 8, verse 1. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. This is already a messy situation. You know this from experience. Anytime there's a big confrontation in a public place with lots of people watching, things get messy fast. But it's only made worse by the fact that this woman's sin was adultery. She cheated on her husband. John doesn't tell us what topic Jesus had been teaching on prior to this moment, but whatever it was probably far less saucy and salacious than this woman's sex life. As a youth leader who teaches up in front of people, I can appreciate how uncomfortable a situation this must have immediately become. I mean, if I was in the middle of a sermon and a student burst through the door suddenly like, "Jeffrey the sixth grader just smacked the senior pastor in the face," I wouldn't be like, "Yes, well, thank you for letting us know. Class, let's get back to our rousing study of Leviticus then, shall we?" Nah, I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I see you, Jeffrey. Aye, bro. Okay, dog." I'm just joking, y'all. I'm just joking. Jeffrey, if you're watching this, violence is not the answer, buddy. But I'm just trying to say some interruptions are so distracting that like whatever we were talking about Well, now we're talking about this new thing that's happening. And for Jesus, this disruptive distraction happened in a very public forum. So again, let's just appreciate that already this situation has kind of become rigged against Jesus. But it gets worse. Verse 4. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. This is a tough predicament these NPCs have put Jesus in. It's true that the Old Testament law deemed adultery as a sin punishable by death. That's absolutely accurate, harsh as it may seem to us. And as an increasingly famous religious leader, it would undermine Jesus' credibility to blow off the Old Testament law in front of a crowd of people. But at the same time, if Jesus decided in this moment to go ahead and have this woman be stoned to death, that's not going to sit well with the people emotionally. I mean, imagine going to a youth retreat expecting amazing sermons and worship and life change, and instead you wind up witnessing an execution led by the guest speaker. You're probably not gonna like that guest speaker very much anymore, are you? How much you wanna bet that guest speaker's name was Jeffrey? This was a classic lose-lose situation for Jesus. The Pharisees had rigged the game against him so that seemingly, no matter what he chose, he would lose. Here's how Jesus responds. Verse 6. "But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, 'All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone.' And then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust." Now, we have no idea what Jesus was writing in the dust, but what an amazing response to this supposedly lose-lose question he was asked. There's no way to know for sure, but it sort of just feels like he just kind of stooped down and just kind of doodled in the dust as he gave the situation some serious thought. You've probably done the same kind of thing when you're thinking deeply. Doing something physical, it's absent-minded, can sometimes just help us think. But anyway, Jesus' response was ultimately to remind every religious leader present that they've sinned too. And in the end, every single one of them took the L and walked away. That's what we see in verse 9. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. And then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." It's pretty incredible how Jesus managed to squeak out a third option here, a non-negative outcome. But I'm not sure that that's really the takeaway for you and me. Our takeaway is that in the midst of a pretty messy split decision, Jesus seized an opportunity to grapple with the gospel and its implications. He seized the opportunity to wrestle with grace and with sin and with redemption, and those gospel values ultimately filtered his decision-making process. I know that the stakes were high here and that a woman's life hung in the balance, but I just think for you and me, the process of how Jesus went about making this split decision is more important than the result of his split decision. Like when Jesus was presented with two bad options, it led him to consider the gospel and its implications more fully, and that led him to greater clarity. I think you and I would be wise to handle our difficult split decisions the same way. I'm almost sure this isn't going to be easy for some of you to put into practice. I get that it's difficult sometimes to connect the dots between what God did for us on the cross 2,000 years ago and a difficult decision that you have to make in life now. I get that that might feel difficult to do. But the whole point of placing your faith in Jesus and living as a Christian is that you allow the gospel to work its way into all of your split decisions in your life, and not just the obvious, like, do I smack the senior pastor kinds of decisions. You put that hand away, Jeffrey. Sometimes life is gonna hand you split moments that honestly feel like lose-lose options. That's just life, and it happens to all of us. But the way you process through those tough decisions has the ability to change you and make you better and make you more like Jesus. And who knows? Seeing your decisions through the lens of the gospel may occasionally lead you to a surprise third option that's way better than the others. Here's the point. Grapple with the gospel. And when you do, you'll be a lot better off. On the surface, you may still have to deal with the lesser of two evils in a given split decision. You may still not have as many friends as you'd like. You may still have a tougher path toward becoming a pro athlete. You may still not get the best grades all the time. But inwardly, grappling with the gospel as you navigate decisions around those things, it'll make you a better human being, a more healthy human being, a human being who looks a whole lot more like Jesus. Decision making is difficult and weighty, and it only gets harder as you grow older. But whether the decisions you make are explicitly spiritually related or not, I want you to know that Jesus lived and died and rose again in order to influence the way you make those kinds of decisions. You are not alone. And having the God of the universe with you as you navigate the tricky, messy, split decisions of life can only be helpful. So my prayer for you is that Jesus would give you wisdom to make good decisions that lead to the best outcomes, but more importantly, that you would be transformed and made more like him in the process of whatever decisions you make.